Welcome into another edition of the All Things Bama Podcast, powered by BamaCentral.com, your Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation home for all Alabama Crimson Tide news and information. I'm your host, Tyler Martin. Joined with me this week is BamaCentral intern Blake Byler, and then BamaCentral staff writer again for the second straight week, Tony Tsoukalas. Guys, glad you're on here. And better spirits too from last week. I know Alabama basketball was coming off of a tough loss to Auburn, ended up losing over the weekend to Kentucky. But as we record this on Thursday evening, Alabama gets a big time win on the road against a Southeastern Conference foe in Ole Miss in a game that Alabama really needed to have. I wouldn't say it was must win, but it was a game they needed to have.
It prevented a future game from being a must win. You know what I'm saying? Like the bleeding needed to stop at one point. So I think that, it might not be your quote unquote must win game, but it was a really important one for Alabama because they needed to have something positive. The thing about it is I think we're always ready to say like this Alabama team's turned around. This Alabama team's in the same position as it was heading into the Ole Miss game. Nothing changed in terms of the sense of urgency that this team should have. And that's, I think, going to be the big test is does this team now let up, or does it continue to build off of this?
Yeah, it's a confidence builder. I think that's one of the most important things that they can get from that game because, like, you're coming off a game against Kentucky where they shot 10% from three, like the worst three-point output that they've had in the past decade or so. And you're going into Ole Miss, and it's tough to get any kind of road win in the SEC. And Alabama struggled on the road, especially this season. That was their first road win since I think January 5th against Florida. And so you've gone over a month without a road win, and you can go in and beat. They're not exactly a good team in Ole Miss, but just going on the road and beating a team that you should is something that honestly we haven't been able to say a lot about this Alabama team so far this season. Whenever you look at like games against Missouri and Georgia, whenever you go on the road and you lose a game you shouldn't. And so like Tony, I agree with you that they're not necessarily in a better position. They're kind of in the same spot and need to have the same sense of urgency, but it's certainly nice for them to actually see them take care of business.
But you look at the box score really, and Jarkel Joyner, when he drops 33 points, he was coming off of an injury. This is his first game back in a minute. And you look at that, Ole Miss puts up 80 plus. If you would have told me that before the game that he drops 33 and Ole Miss puts up over 80 as a team, I said, okay, Alabama loses, right? Because Alabama isn't the defensive team that they were last year, right? I think everybody's starting to realize that, and they're starting to realize how unrealistic the expectations were on this specific team. But man, for Jaden Shackelford, I said it before we really got going, is it's amazing what you can do when you're not sick, right? I mean, and I'm not trying to make excuses for the Kentucky game or whatever, but you made a great point, Blake. It was historically bad. I mean, it was the worst shooting performance since 2011. I mean, it was really, really bad. It really reminded me, of the Anthony Grant era, just some kind of lulls offensively there. And, Jaden Shackelford getting that career high 30 points was a big deal. 8 threes, which tied a career high. That's huge. But what I also saw and what I've seen over the last really week and a half, 2 weeks with this team is the effort is really starting to be there. And I saw a tweet last night. Somebody made a great point about how, the casual college basketball fan, they'll correlate effort and toughness with made shots. And you can't do that all the time, right? Like, watching the Kentucky game in person, being in there, it was a great atmosphere. The crowd was just waiting to jump and waiting to get something going. But you can't tell me Alabama wasn't playing hard in that Kentucky game. They weren't getting after it. I mean, Charles Bediako is finally playing some of the best basketball of his young Alabama career, and they're going to need him on Saturday against Arkansas to kind of match up with their post players. But I thought Alabama, I thought their toughness and their effort that they have been giving was rewarded on Wednesday night with that kind of shooting performance.
Is this sustainable though? I mean, you mentioned it. They did hustle against Kentucky, and they got beaten by a team that could rebound, that could beat them inside. They're never going to hit, or they're not going to hit 14 of 22 3-pointers every game. So, without we talked about the post presence last podcast. Is this team is what they did against Ole Miss, is that sustainable? And I don't know.
I don't know if it's necessarily sustained. Like, obviously 14 to 22 is not sustainable. And also you kind of saw that with Ole Miss. Like they started the game 7 for 10, and that wasn't even sustainable for the duration of the game. And so like shooting a high percentage like that isn't necessarily going to be sustainable. What Alabama needs to do is if they can only make like 36, 37% instead of like in the 60s. Like on the season, I think they're around 29 or something like that, like an atrocious number compared to a year ago. So if even like I saw at the end of the game, you even had guys like Noah Gurley seeing shots go down. You had JD was 2 for 2. I think Keon made his only 3. So if the guys that like, if they're taking shots and just making it when their number is called, that's going to be big to getting that percentage around 37, 38, a number that could be sustainable, that could lead to wins. Because if you're making it that clip, just like, for example, against Kentucky, if Alabama makes 2, 3, 4 more threes, you could possibly see them win that game. And even then that would have been 7 or 8 for 30, which isn't even a good percentage. And so I don't think the 60% is sustainable, but if they can still hang around maybe a sustainable clip between 35 and 40, I think you could see a big improvement, and you could see a lot more wins come with that.
That's a fair point too, because I mean, that as much as they're not going to shoot 14 of 22, they're also not going to shoot 3 of 30. So I think that's probably a fair thing. Yeah.
Well, Alabama now turns the page from a 97-83 victory over Ole Miss to Arkansas, who just beat Auburn, the first SEC team this year to knock off the first-ranked Tigers. And, Auburn was obviously out without Zeb Jasper in that game. Their starting point guard, their best perimeter defender. But Arkansas, I mean, JD Notae wasn't necessarily efficient, but he has been really that scorer for them like he was last year for the most part. 27 points in that game. And look at it. Arkansas has now won, 9 games in a row? 9, including a win over West Virginia in the Big 12 SEC Challenge. To me, in my opinion, guys, this is where Alabama probably wants to play Arkansas, right? Because this is probably the best they're playing right now. They're probably the best they'll play all year because they peaked, right? I mean, you go look at what they did the first 3 games of the conference play. I mean, they lost to Vanderbilt. They lost to Mississippi State. They lost to some other teams. They lost to Missouri. Let's say they lost to A&M as well. So, they have a couple losses here that are just kind of head-scratching a little bit. So, in my opinion, this is kind of where Alabama wants to play them, and it could be another, great resume win for Alabama.
This is an Arkansas team that's kind of a sleeping giant, because it's one that we thought was going to compete for the SEC, title. And then they, like you said, they lost some of their games. They're kind of having a season, somewhat similar to Alabama, where they just have some head scratching losses, but now they're starting to have some big wins. And I think, you just can't take this team lightly. You have to really consider this team. It's almost like playing another Auburn or playing another Kentucky. I know it doesn't have the top 5 next to it, but I mean, it's a talented squad. It's going to be tough to win. And I think it's a good test for Alabama. You're supposed to beat Ole Miss. I mean, they were second to last in the SEC. That they just, they have an okay team, but you're supposed to win those games. This is the game where, if you're going to make a move, you got to win these games.
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more important games on the schedule, just to prove that you can still go out there and beat a really good team. And so Arkansas obviously has been on fire, probably one of the hottest teams in the country right now. And I think they're 31st, 32nd in the net right now. If they rose a couple spots, then it's a quad 1 win if Alabama were to win that game. And I think them coming into Coleman is one of the most, honestly a blessing for Alabama that they're getting this game at home rather than having to travel to Fayetteville, because Arkansas has got some really good players. Note, I think, is leading the SEC in scoring. He's 19, 20 a game, something like that. And then you've got Jalen Williams down low, who gave Alabama fits in Fayetteville a year ago. They got a bunch of transfers in. I think they start 3 or 4 guys who are 6'6" or over. And so it's definitely going to be a challenge size-wise for Alabama, because we know Shackelford and Quinterly are a little undersized in that area. But it's definitely a big opportunity. And I kind of think it might play into Alabama's favor that it's a better opponent and that they're coming off a really high energy game against Auburn, because one, you could see a potential letdown from Arkansas coming off that emotional high going on the road, but also Alabama can look and see, oh, they just knocked off Auburn. We're going to have to bring our A game. And obviously inconsistent effort has been a main problem with this team. And so seeing that Arkansas is coming off that win and seeing what they're capable of, I think that's going to make sure that Alabama brings their A game on Saturday morning.
Now, Alabama hasn't had many 11 a.m. tips already this year. And we saw last year when Alabama had a lot of 11 a.m. tips. It was rough starts, right? Really rough starts. And that's why this game does kind of scare me because it is at 11 a.m. And I do think that favors Arkansas to some extent, right? But I think, them coming off of that win against Auburn and just how electric that atmosphere was in Bud Walton Arena, and the intensity. I mean, you have Eric Musselman running, or he has a hurt shoulder in a sling, and he's running around with his shirt off, which was pretty electric scene. I mean, he's running around. I mean, he's this is a hangover for them. I think it's going to be coming up on Saturday. But when you look at the schedule, guys, after Arkansas, right? Alabama plays Mississippi State, at Kentucky, at Vandy, South Carolina, and then A&M at home, and then they finish at LSU on the road. Vanderbilt, South Carolina, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, those are winnable games. Even if Alabama was to lose to Arkansas and Kentucky, the two best teams remaining on its schedule, you're still getting them to 19 wins on the year. And so Alabama's in a really great situation right here to finish strong, because the hardest part of their schedule is over, that they've gotten over the hump. And we'll see, who knows, last year, I know it was COVID year and all that, Alabama was able to go in and beat Kentucky in Rupp Arena. That will be an interesting game, and a noon tip-off on CBS and next Saturday. But for, in the good news is, 4 of your last 6 games are at home. So, Coleman Coliseum has been great this season so far, and I think it will continue to be that way as Alabama kind of hits the home stretch right here. And you can say the easier part of its schedule.
If this is the Alabama team that we thought it was, which, I'm not entirely sure it is, then they should be grabbing five of their last 6. I think, you can't just look at them as an average team. I mean, if this is what you thought this Alabama team was, the one that, you came into the season, and I don't know if we still think that this is that Alabama team, but if you still go by those standards, they should win 5 of the next 6. They should lose the game to Kentucky, and they should win the rest of the 5. Will they do that? Recent history says they won't, because they haven't been able to do that. They haven't been able to maintain consistency, but I mean, this Alabama team is good enough to win 5.
Yeah, I agree. I was talking about this with Joey on the Extra Point yesterday. And we were looking at the schedule, and we're like, it's really favorable. When you look at the teams that are left and the games that you get at home, you go to Kentucky, but if you take that one out of the equation, the hardest games left are at home. You get A&M, Arkansas, and Mississippi State all at home. And so theoretically, those should be winnable games for Alabama. Now, obviously, with the way this season has gone, nothing is a guarantee. But if the team plays with the kind of talent that they have and the kind of effort that we've seen from them in big games, absolutely, they could finish the season with one more loss and then finish 19-20 wins, maybe get to 11-7, maybe 10-8 in the SEC, which is really good considering the fact that they started 4-8, which I think I saw was their worst start in SEC play since about 2016 or something like that. And so after a really rough start, they have a chance to finish really well and be playing some really good basketball going into March, which is one of the most important things.
What do you guys see, honestly, prediction-wise, what do you guys see these next? Because, I mean, I could see them, like I said, they have the talent to go 5-1. I could see them going 3-3. I mean, that's the weird thing about this Alabama team. I mean, they really could, as favorable as it is, they could go 3-3. They could lose Arkansas, they could lose Kentucky, and then they could, fumble around and maybe lose at LSU or something like that, and that's the thing. I guess, what do you guys think? I guess I'm gonna go 4-2. I think they're going to finish off 4-2. What do you guys think?
That's exactly what I was about to say, Tony, because, J.D. Davison, what we saw in the Ole Miss game, he's coming on strong. And I think really him and Charles Bediako are the difference makers, right? We know what Shackelford's going to bring you. We know what Quinterly's going to do. But really, J.D. and Charles have got to be kind of really the cogs in this, right? And I think here, we know how difficult it is to play at Vanderbilt, right? That's a sleepy spot right there. I mean, how many, it's not very often that Alabama goes into Nashville and wins. Now it happened, 2 years ago, but it's not a place that's treated Alabama very, very well. So, I'll go on record. I'll say here, I'll say a win against Arkansas State, loss to Kentucky. I'll say they'll beat Vandy, but I'll say they'll lose one of the two between Carolina and A&M. It's just, I'll say 4-2, and then the LSU
trap game.
Well, right there. And LSU, they've they're a team that's really fallen off the map per se, but who knows, in 2 weeks, they might be a completely different team as well. So I'll go 4-2.
This Alabama team has taught me that it's going to go into Kentucky and knock off the Wildcats in Rupp Arena and then go and lose a quirky game.
No, that would definitely happen.
Yeah, that could very well happen.
Because even when you think about the Kentucky game in Coleman last weekend, they played well enough to win. They just didn't make shots. A lot of shots were open and they just didn't fall. if you told me before the game that Alabama held Kentucky to 66 points, I'm like, okay, yeah, they win.
Yeah.
Like they played good enough defense to win for sure. And so who knows what happens when you go into Rupp. I'm agreeing with y'all. I think they lose the game at Rupp and drop one more. I don't know what that other one necessarily is, whether it be, I think it's probably one of the last three, either Carolina or A&M at home or at LSU. But I think they can get this win this weekend, just with Arkansas possibly it being a letdown, and Alabama coming off a hot shooting night. I think they can get that win. They're going to want revenge against Mississippi State at home after losing in Starkville earlier this year. Lose to Kentucky. They'll lose one of the last four, I think. Like they haven't been consistent enough for me to predict only one loss. Like you can't really go on record and be like, sure. Like they should theoretically only have one loss, but who knows with them, you know?
It's college basketball.
That's the scary thing about this Arkansas game, right? Because you can't predict 4 straight wins with the way this Alabama team plays. So you lose Arkansas, and if you don't beat Kentucky, chances are you're splitting. You're going 3-3. You know,
that's true.
I don't think anybody. I mean, I guess 18 wins. I mean, that's definitely going to be enough to get them in the tournament. You know, and then they'll probably win a game in the SEC tournament, and so at least 19, maybe 20, wins heading into the NCAA tournament. That's not what we were expecting. Especially not when, we saw them knock off. If you would have said that, this Alabama team has 18 wins, you wouldn't have expected them to beat Baylor and Gonzaga. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So It's kind of been a nuts season.
And it's those wins that have kept Alabama firmly in the NCAA tournament conversation and enough NIT chatter. It's just, I'm hearing that a lot from a lot of casual fans, and that's just not the case, man. The SEC,
they're not even close to the bubble.
Yeah. I mean,
they would have to go like 2-4, 1-5.
They'd have to near lose out.
It would have to
be on the bubble.
Utter disaster. The last 3 weeks of the season. And so, like I said, I mean, it's just when everybody thinks the sky's falling, right? When you lose to 2 number 1 seeds back to back. But the Ole Miss game also too was an indicator of Alabama's mental toughness, I thought, as well. And it kind of showed they have the right moxie and the right toughness about them in that area. Well, enough basketball for now. The second half of this conversation here, guys, I want it to be kind of about football and what's going on across the state at Auburn and how it relates to Alabama. Just absolute madness, what we've seen over the last week with Brian Harsin and his, tumultuous tenure on the Plains. Today, Thursday, there was a SEC coaches meeting. It was the first in-person meeting for all coaches since COVID began. And Nick Saban was there. All the SEC coaches were there, obviously. And Brian Harsin shows up, enters in that side door or whatever. Tony, I'm kind of surprised you didn't make the trip up there to stake it out.
I didn't, but it's a lot less drama on the Alabama side, I guess, than it is on the Auburn side.
Yeah, no kidding. That's what me and Blake were talking about before this is just, you know what, I mean, every football coach since Pat Dye, it's been this way for Auburn. A lot of dysfunction, but I really kind of wanted to turn the conversation toward how this affects Alabama in recruiting because, I have the 24/7 Sports composite pulled up right here, and you look at this class just of in-state talents in Alabama. Alabama could probably say they just recruited just the state of Alabama. They could have a top 10 class altogether just recruiting in-state talent. That's how unbelievable this talent is, especially at the defensive line with guys like James Smith. You have Kelby Collins. I got to shout out a Garndale guy as a Garndale alum. To Marion Parker, who just released a top 6 as well and had Alabama there. You've got great players all over the place, even in the defensive. And Peter Woods, too. I want to mention him from Thompson. But you look at there's also 2 prospects at Central Phoenix City right next to Auburn that Alabama is, interested in A.J. Harris. And then the other one was Tamarion Parker, who I mentioned earlier. And Auburn's not involved with any of those. Auburn's not involved with any of the top 10 to 12 prospects in the state of Alabama. And this is where Alabama can really capitalize on a bad situation for Auburn and dominate this state. And here's the thing. If Auburn doesn't get this fixed and you look at how Alabama's continuing to build, I mean, it's just going to be this way for the next couple of seasons, honestly, because if you're Auburn and you don't get anybody really here of elite talent, then you're setting yourselves back 2 to 3 seasons.
I mean, how do you go? There's 5 5-stars, right, in the state of Alabama, and I don't, like you said, I don't think Auburn's going to get a single one of them. I think, especially in the secondary, I think, Alabama's got a good shot with Tony Mitchell. I think it's got a really good shot with Jaleel Hurley. I think Peter Woods got a good shot. I think probably AJ Harris is going to, probably I would say Georgia, but but like, how do you go 0 for 5 on 5 stars? That's a tough, that's tough when you're not only losing to, Alabama, you're also losing to Georgia, and like you said, 2 of these guys are Phoenix City kids. That's right in that, Alabama's back door or Auburn's back door. They should.
Alabama hasn't been able to recruit Phoenix City history speaks for us. I mean, that's not a place where Alabama just goes in and is able to pick apart the top talent. I mean, Georgia's been a place that's really thrived there. Carmelo English is another great prospect there, who's a wide receiver. Who's I would say kind of. I mean, Alabama's he hasn't reported. He's reported an offer, but I don't know how high he is on Alabama's list right now. He's just another kid, right? Who should be, an Auburn lean at the end of the day. But it's just Alabama and Georgia. I mean, there's just, and I get it. Auburn might be a tough job from the location and where they're at, centered around 2 college football powers, right? And what Kirby Smart's built Georgia to be, and obviously what Nick Saban's built Alabama to be. I get it's tough, but you're right, Tony. I mean, these kids are right in your backyard.
I mean, and then like go down this list. I mean, like, not to just harp on Auburn right now, but like when's the first person in state that they, that you would give to Auburn?
They've got one commitment right now from Braden Joyner, who's 16th in the state according to 24/7 Composite, and he's from Auburn.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like, I guess would you maybe they, Vizina, Christopher Vizina, the quarterback. I mean, maybe they have a shot at him. That's a person that I'm not sure. Alabama would. I think Alabama's going to probably end up with a better quarterback than that. So I mean, like, it's kind of tough when you look at it. I mean, like, what's going to be Auburn's highest ranked in-state kid, and it could be down the list a bit. A lot more than in recent years.
And I'm glad you mentioned Joyner, Blake, because that's a guy I met last spring actually at like a 7-on-7 event. And, if things continue to trend the way they are for Auburn, I'm not sure that commitment's actually really sticking. He's a guy who told me just point blank, hey, if Clemson offered me today, I would join Clemson. So like, and Auburn definitely made a move since then because he committed to them, obviously. But again, like I said, I mean, how many of these commitments this early in advance in this cycle are actually going to stick with them?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and you never know how things change, I mean, doesn't look like Brian Harsin's going to be the guy. So you never know how that next regime is going to come in. Maybe they make some momentum and, maybe Auburn gets some of these guys late, I mean, we're really early in the recruiting process. So it's still Auburn. It's still a big Power 5 school in state. Like if they get some momentum, then they could be a sleeping giant. They could, it doesn't take long to get hot. I mean, look, Alabama only has 1 commit. Are you worried? No, but but like the same thing is like for Auburn, slow start or there's time to turn it around. But it's you look at all the talent in state. It's one of the best years Alabama's had, and what a bad time to be in Auburn's position right now. And then what a great time to be in Alabama's position, because I mean, you look at that top 5. I could see Alabama getting 4 of the top 5.
Yeah, the slow start, it's tough because one, the year and just the situation like around how much talent is coming out of the state. And then secondly, having a slow start on top of the coaching turmoil, and you just don't know where it's going to go. Like, honestly, like, what do you got? Like, do you guys think Brian Harsin is going to be the coach at Auburn next season?
He can't. He can't be it. Like, what are they going to say? Like, oh,
exactly.
It's okay. Like, even if like Auburn wanted him to be the coach, there's no going back. The toothpaste is out of the tube. You cannot make him the coach and take him seriously. Like, they've ruined that. So, I mean,
and then where do they go? Like, once you move on from Harsin, you go where? Who knows? Like,
hey, Hugh
no
Freeze
one has an answer.
For them. Hugh Freeze is a name that I think fans and some national media pundits want to throw around. I think that's a pipe dream for them at the end of the day.
Is he approved to coach in the SEC?
First, he probably would be, right? I mean,
I don't know if he
has
been yet. It's been a while though.
Yeah,
so that's true.
Like, how much is he going to cost too? And like Auburn, just, I mean, it depends if they have to buy out Harsin. I mean, like
they're still paying Gus.
What?
They're still paying Malzahn.
No, yeah, they're still paying Gus. They're going to be paying Harsin. That's what I'm saying. Like, how much are they going to be able to invest in a big?
They'd have to buy out. Yeah, they'd have to buy out Freeze because he just signed an 8-year extension with Liberty.
That's what I'm saying. So
Sure.
like, how are you going to afford Freeze or, it's like,
You have to get a stopgap coach for a year.
do you promote within?
Kevin Steele just took
Kevin
the Miami
Steele.
defensive coordinator job, and I
think
know
Kevin Steele-
there was a coup in the Auburn boosters to try to get him the job, and that obviously got stopped. But he just took the Miami defensive coordinator job, which that's another story. Cristobal is really building up a solid staff down there in Miami, and I do think there is cause for concern for Alabama's recruiting efforts in that area because Cristobal really wants to put a fence around that place, the 305. But that's another conversation. But yeah, there has to be a stopgap coach. You think about it. Like Tom Brady was a stopgap quarterback now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? They're trying to, maybe develop somebody young. That's what you're going to have to get for Auburn.
Kevin Steele was my first thought when it came up, right? I mean, I think
Right.
just because he's a defensive coordinator doesn't mean he wouldn't take a head coaching job. And maybe that's your stopgap,
And you think that's where they lean because that's where a lot of people within the program wanted to go originally a year ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, that to me, Kevin Steele's a good coach. Don't get me wrong, but that's an underwhelming, like that's not moving the needle for me,
No.
Mm-hmm.
And another point I want to make here, guys, is that, so many times I don't know how many times I've seen it from some guys on the Auburn beat or guys on and maybe there's Twitter spaces, right? The one that lasted about 17 hours on Twitter a couple of days ago. But, I hear this so many times, right? Auburn went 6-7 its first season. Alabama went 7-6, right? In Nick Saban's first year. And the reality is this, I hear so many guys say, well, you know what? Nick Saban, he had a similar tumultuous first season, right? This is something similar. You got to let him coach. You got to let him do it his way, right? You got to get the guys out of the program that don't want to be there. And they're comparing Harsin and Nick Saban in 2007 to 2021. I think they couldn't be farther apart from each other. Why I'm saying that is because, for one, Nick Saban was a proven – he'd won a national title before he even landed in Tuscaloosa. Brian Harsin and our friends at All Hogs who run the Arkansas Sports Illustrated page, they reported on a story saying that before he took the Boise head coaching job, he was going to get fired from Arkansas State. These two are not the same situations, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they're similar. And another reason I don't think they're similar is recruiting, like we've been talking about. Like Nick Saban followed up 2007 with landing Julio Jones, who kind of kicked off the recruiting dominance that Alabama had and is still on the run that they're still on. And Auburn is following up this, their 6-7 season with, what did they finish in 22 in the 22 class?
I think they're like 18.
In the SEC.
They didn't sign anybody.
Right.
Traditional signing.
There was no big signing of, watch out for this guy. They're going to start landing these big guys that's going to turn their program around.
Tony, you got any final thoughts on this, man?
Would Auburn take Bill O'Brien? That's never going to happen, but would they take Bill O'Brien?
Well, I thought he was going to New England.
I did too.
I know. What I'm saying. That is that how that would be like a dream. That'd be better than some of the names that I'm hearing from, right?
I think it would. It would definitely be better than Kevin Steele. It'd definitely be better than I think
he's more realistic than Hugh Freeze.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I'm not even saying that that's close to happening.
No, yeah.
I'm just saying that's,
I don't even know if they get fired up about that.
I think you should. From Auburn's perspective, I don't think they're getting anybody better than. I think Bill O'Brien gets a bad rap. I think.
I do too.
I don't think he's
a good football coach.
I don't think he's. He's not Lane and he's not Sark, but those are two of the best offensive coordinators Alabama's had. You know what I'm saying? That doesn't mean bad. So
I agree.
No, it's going to be an interesting, conclusion to whatever happens, right? Heck, something could break as we wrap this up, or even tomorrow morning before this post. Who knows what's going on? But as of right now, Brian Harsin is still the Auburn University football coach. And it was, like I said, from social media, it was just looked like an awkward scene. As the whole mob of people are trying to follow him out to his car, and he took the most weird route to his vehicle to get in there, and it's just, you can just tell, it just from what I could tell, he didn't want to be there. And Auburn's doing their job, they're doing their darndest to make it untenable for him. And I'm really interested to see how this all plays out because, man, it literally Ivan Maisel said it best. Like he had a tweet saying, this is playing out like a Netflix miniseries. And I can't wait to see how it wraps up.
It's
certainly going to be interesting.
It's going to be fun to follow because there's going to be some more drama. And if I'm Brian Harsin, I don't go gently here. You know what I'm saying? I'm not. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot more drama that comes from this. And like we said, like we started this whole segment, I think Auburn needs to resolve this as quickly as possible because they need to start, changing the momentum, changing the tide, I guess, if you will. But there's too much talent in state for them to miss out on a lot of it. And they're going to have to reverse something real quick, or elsewise Alabama and Georgia are just going to just run away. They're going to separate themselves even further.
Yeah, the key's recruiting. You're exactly right, Tony, and that's how they can turn this thing around. But who knows if that'll be Brian Harsin at the helm? We will see. But guys, thanks again for coming on here. Appreciate you, Blake. Thank you, Tony. Again, listeners, or actually viewers now, because we're actually on YouTube now. The whole thing's posted on there as well. Feel free to comment in the comment section on there. Like, rate, subscribe to the BamaCentral YouTube page. We got a lot of content coming up there. Daily, pretty much. The staff at BamaCentral do a phenomenal job keeping you guys updated on everything in the Alabama world. But for Blake Byler, Tony Tsoukalas, I am Tyler Martin. This has been another edition of the All Things Bama Podcast.